So let's get things started. Welcome to all the attendees that are here today to this panel that we put together just to chat about DeepSeek as it's, along with the tariffs, really shaking up the Canadian economy and the global economy. Um, so uh, Over here in the panel today, I'd like to introduce everyone to Ian, who's the executive director over at DeepSeek. They're an organization of Dalhousie, where their mission is to grow the marine economy with AI. And we also have here Bo, who is a course instructor and working on his PhD currently at St. FX, and is also the founder of OLIP Technologies. And OLIP Technologies is really cool because they're the intersection of AI and sports technology, and they're really trying to use AI to help athletes, help coaches essentially become better through this technology. And lastly, we have Junior Williams, which is a last addition to our panel here, last minute addition, and he's a senior solutions architect over at Mobia. And he comes with 30 years of program experience in IT infrastructure and cybersecurity and AI, and is actually a member of the Standards Council of Canada Mirror Committees for cybersecurity standards and also AI standards. And he actually plays a very key role in helping to shape global security and AI governance. Welcome, guys. And I guess before we kind of get started, I'd love to just kind of set the base, everyone here, for all the attendees here so far. In terms of looking at DeepSeek overall, we all know how expensive OpenAI was to create and to actually put into market. But with that said, this Chinese company, DeepSeek, came out with a model that only cost $6 million to develop. And for some of those of you queuing into our conversation earlier on, that number is pretty accurate. So this kind of caused some shakeup, especially with stock markets. So stocks like Nvidia, we saw within one day on the Friday last week or 2 weeks ago that there was a 16.5% decrease in their stock price within just one day. And we've seen this across the board in other kind of AI infrastructure stocks, chip stocks, and things like that. And really, this comes back down to, hey, AI might be cheaper and more effective than we might have thought in terms of model creation and things like that, especially with DeepSeek costing only about 3% of the cost of what OpenAI it takes to run OpenAI. With that said, I'd love to kind of pass things on to their panelists. I'd love to maybe start off from even a business and social aspect side of things with Ian. Kind of based on your work and experimentation with DeepSeek, how does this differ from other LLMs that you've played around with, that you've experimented with, and how's this kind of impacting your work within marine and AI intersection?
Sure, thanks, Derek. I guess first off, it's Deep Sense. We'll take a
Thanks.
bit of the deep seek smoke if we can, given that brand recognition, but it's Deep Sense out of Dalhousie's. And I actually don't use DeepSeek a lot. I use OpenAI's products both professionally and personally on an almost daily basis. But I have been following the evolution of these models and their ability to reason, and all the benchmarks that DeepSeek is able to hit with R1 are very comparable to the latest publicly available models from the big AI companies. And sort of when this all came out and sort of hit, it was really interesting to follow what got us here and the idea that compute would be the limiting factor with generative AI models. So, to give a bit of background in software development and in business in general, there's the idea of moats. So, those are things that protect you from competition, allow you to establish your business. And in software development, the limiting factor of the moat has been coding, because you need people to code. It's sort of a commodity that people produce. And there's software engineers and everything that sort of lay out the systems, but has taken sort of people power in order to produce the code to develop product. And the whole VC industry, the whole software industry was built around the idea of moats, where you would have an idea, you'd spend sort of 2 to 12 months developing a product with a team of developers. You launch that, you spend another sort of 0 to 12 months trying to find product market fit. That's where sort of you get pull from the market and you're really able to take off. And the moat is that it would take anybody else another 2 to 6 months to spin up a team, write the code, to copy what you're doing. And at that point, you've taken on VC money, so you're blitz scaling at this point. So you kind of reach escape velocity as a product, as a company. And that's been the playbook for software for a few decades now. And why generative AI is such an impact on the software industry is that it's essentially taking coding from a commodity that's restricted by the people that can do it and turning it more into a function of generative AI systems where the coding is computer language. Large language models are designed to interpret and communicate through language. So they're actually quite well set up to replace at least a lot of the base sort of fundamental coding that happens when you're developing software. So the limiting commodity, or the commodity that has defined the business model of software, is moving from a constrained commodity to a function in generative AI. So the industry needed a new moat, needed something that they could point to that would protect their investments to develop these products, and collectively decided that compute was going to be that moat. Because anytime you're developing something to begin with, sort of the first mover, it takes a huge effort. And then generally it gets easier and easier as whatever the product or sort of type of technology is, it's easier and easier to develop in successive iterations. But basically the collective decided that compute was going to be the main limiting factor to this. That's why you saw the 2.4 billion in AI spend that the federal government announced was mostly dedicated to compute. A few weeks ago, Trump announced the project with Oracle, OpenAI, and SoftBank for the 500 billion, again, to go towards compute. What happened, and the reason that this was such a big bomb dropped on to NVIDIA and the ecosystem in general, or economy in general, is that it's 50 times more efficient than the current models. I'll let sort of Bowen Jr. get into technically why that is if they want, but what's happened is all of a sudden NVIDIA and sort of this moat that a lot of these big companies thought they had has essentially evaporated. Now, the other side of this is that there's something called Jevons paradox, which is when a commodity gets cheaper, demand for that commodity actually rises and increases. So, it's a bit of a false narrative that, oh no, the AI industry is in trouble because this moat is evaporating. But that's the natural way that these things work in any industry or with any new technology as it matures. And if you think of another general purpose technology in electricity, and general purpose technology are technologies that find our way into every part of our lives and influence every part of our lives. If you think of electricity as a commodity, its killer app, the thing that really made it popular, was creating light. And what happened was that was sort of its chatbot. Sort of everybody's like, oh, what a great use. But as the marginal cost of electricity started to drop, the applications for that electricity started to grow, and demand for the electricity overall started to grow. So what we're seeing here on a macroeconomic scale is the sort of peaks and valleys of a new technology coming onto the market. And, probably don't want to sell all your NVIDIA stock right away, play whatever dips and bumps you want, but this is such a powerful technology that has the potential to be deployed at such scale and in so many ways that we're probably going to look back at this moment in time and kind of laugh at it a little bit of given the scale of what it will become. But certainly fun. Anyway, I'll let Bowen Jr. get in there.
For sure. Yeah. So I'd love to maybe jump over to Bowen Jr. To talk a little bit more about the technical side, because just for kind of audience clarity as well, and an introduction, is what makes DeepSeek actually so so useful and so quick in terms of their model is because most LLMs use a combination of pre-training, supervised machine learning, and reinforcement learning. But with DeepSeek's R1 model, it actually uses a combination of something called chain of thought, which really allows for the model to self-reflect on its reasoning. So for those of you who've used DeepSeek, you'll actually see it ask itself questions and help figure out the logic before it gives you that response. And it's very transparent about that. And through a combination of that, something called distillation and reinforcement learning, and a focus is on that reinforcement learning piece, it actually made this model a lot more effective than, let's say, OpenAI or Llama or anything like that. So maybe we'll start off with Bo. On the academic side, like and kind of your research and with OLIP, like, how have you been experimenting with DeepSeek? How has this kind of change in how the model is developed actually react to your outputs and things like that?
Yeah, when it just comes to like LLMs, I strictly now just use them strictly just for development purposes. So whenever it's like I'm using like any type of LLM to help me do any type of task, it's really more like on coding. So I pretty much just utilize a lot of the model's capabilities to strictly to just help me produce better code and to just do things much quicker. And I think that's just the biggest unlock just for a lot of software developers, just in that case. But also, whilst I'm on that, I think it's just very important just to understand because I've been using like these LLMs for probably for a while now, and I think the biggest thing that you need to do, which I think is very important, is to have your own type of benchmarks. So whenever you have like a new LLM that just comes into the picture, you have your own set of benchmarks, like your own. You don't want to rely too much on what the technical papers says, like what OpenAI is saying about how their models perform on math and all of these different types of things. You want to come up with your own tests for your own problems, right? And then you test the models individually on your own test to actually see how they all perform by themselves, right? So you want to be a little bit more independent in how you kind of like use the models to get a better sense of how they actually perform. You don't want to rely too much on what other people say. You kind of want to ground yourself. You want to be a little more grounded in the truth of how these models actually perform. Otherwise, you end up being led astray into kind of like what's kind of happening here. From a lot of my testing, I've pretty much used a lot of the AI models from closed source to open source. I've used OpenAI's models. I've used Anthropic's models, so Sonnet. I'll probably say that's still a really good model, especially if you like coding. And Gemini's models are really like Google's Gemini models are pretty good too, especially if you're dealing with like a lot of documents because they got like a 2 million context window, depending on which type of model you're using. But they still generally speaking perform really well. And of course now we have like DeepSeek as well. But I think people just need to understand that DeepSeek has been like the company DeepSeek has been around for the last year or two, and they've been releasing a lot of models for like the longest period of time. It's just that people just don't really pay too much attention to what's happening within the open source. But I'll probably like I pretty much knew about DeepSeek R3 and like V3 and like R1 like a week before they became like they became very popular within the media and just kind of like the public space. And when the model initially released, it was like I think everybody within the open source community was like, "Oh, this is a cool model from DeepSeek. Let's test it out." Okay, it performs pretty well. That was kind of like the conversation for like the first couple of days. The next thing you know, we start seeing a lot more conversation happening within the public space. And then next thing you know, all of these different types of events start happening. But I think generally speaking, it's a good thing that DeepSeek kind of like released these models because it's I think there's a lot of noise within the AI space, especially if you're like very, very close just to a lot of the news of what's happening within AI. I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors as well with what you're being told by a lot of the large labs. I think one of the classic things, the narrative around AI has just been changing quite a lot, right? From last year to this year.
Yeah.
Last year, last year it was about the scaling laws, like we need more compute. And now kind of like the narrative has kind of like changed to, oh, this is a war between the US and China, right? So it's become a lot more political. But you also just need to understand kind of like the people who are at uh, who are kind of like running the AI labs and kind of like the conversations that they're having kind of like with regulators. So, you got to pay attention to kind of like what's going on, kind of like at the political level and the types of conversations and things that are happening over there. I think everybody has kind of like heard about the 500 billion in Stargate kind of like investment between kind of like the major AI labs and the US government. I think it's very important just to understand that the US government is not putting any type of funds, right, in that 500 billion, right? It's the private companies, like the AI labs and SoftBank that are actually putting in kind of like those funds in that investment. So I think it's very, very important just to understand that the U.S. government is not putting in any type of funds as of now to that $500 billion.
Can I just quickly jump in there?
Of course.
Yeah. So so I've been studying AI, I would say, for about 22 years or so. 22 years ago, I was looking at it from um, epistemology, ontology, cosmology, linguistics, psychology, computer science perspective, right? Asking the question of, like, I hear a lot of people talking about artificial intelligence, and you might ask them to define intelligence and they might be stumped. But we're talking about AI, and then we're not differentiating between machine learning and generative AI, neural networks, all these different things. Well, and I apologize for the hypotactic reasoning, but I'd be making notes as everyone was talking. Um, there's lots of misconceptions out there. When ChatGPT came out in 2022, a lot of people were talking about hallucinations, kind of getting it wrong because you're asking an LLM fact-based questions, acting or thinking like as though it's looking up, data somewhere, like answering your questions and being like, oh, we can't rely on it because it's not giving us truthful responses, kind of missing the point of large language models and generative AI to begin with, right? So I always like to look at it. So I used all the models. I've used GPT since GPT-2 in what was it, 2020. March is when I started using playing around with Gen AI. It's and also I want to go back to the Jevons paradox and also say that one of the good things about large language models is summarizing information and breaking it down, using it for brainstorming. So when we look at Jevons paradox, maybe a lot of people are familiar with the Chinese clothing manufacturer Shein, right? Perfect example of that with fast fashion, right? Reduce the prices, and now all of a sudden you have this, like, the economy grows exponentially, right? And it's like actually a good parallel because it's extremely detrimental to the environment, the production of all these clothes that eventually inevitably go to waste. A lot of it ends up in Africa, actually, I found out. And then, fast forward to today when we're talking about spending hundreds of billions of dollars on compute, and some of it powered even by coal power plants, when people who are innovating like DeepSeek is actually from a quant firm, right? They had GPUs because they've been doing Bitcoin mining and trading, and they developed DeepSeek kind of as a side hustle to enable that, and then they open sourced it, and yet there's still a misconception. People be like, oh, we don't want to use DeepSeek because we're sending all our data to the Chinese government, which may be the case if you're going to chat.deepseek.com. But if you are running the model locally, it's not connected to the internet, or if you're accessing it through, which I recommend everyone try out if you haven't already, through a site like Perplexity, right, where it's hosted on US servers, it doesn't have the same implications. So when we look at, yeah, actually, I was at a CISO forum yesterday, and some of the people on stage were talking about on Hugging Face, all the hundreds of models available, and how a lot of it has malware. But someone raised the thing like, well, have you tried Olama, right? Again, if you are running Olama, which allows you to load up different models locally on your machine, and you're not connected to the internet, there's not too much danger in data leakage or escaping out. Now, when we're looking at and another thing too that I find a little bit convoluted in discussion is it's primarily focused on LLMs, right? But there's small language models as well. And the same way the LLMs are becoming more potent and effective at what they do, same with the small language models, right? I find it interesting, and maybe NVIDIA is going to rethink launching their little desktop supercomputer in a few months, because when they conceptualized it and announced it, they probably didn't realize that it could be used to train models like DeepSeek locally. Like, you're literally going to democratize the ability to uh, develop LLMs. The other part of the whole story with regards to DeepSeek and the hoopla is, we know pretty much that OpenAI trained their models on the entire corpus body of work of everything that was ever written on the surface and the deep web. And ostensibly, now that they have deep government partnerships, likely even the dark net. And so when we talk about, OpenAI bots, scouring the internet for and scraping data, it's probably more like akin to a real-time cache of the entire internet. I mean, where does it reside? In the cloud. And what is the cloud really? It's just you know, the internet replicated throughout the world in these large data centers. So I apologize for the somewhat broad and nebulous response to the question, but I mean, this is the nature of AI. If you were to take the transcript of this call and everything I said, AI would be very adept at simplifying it and laying it out in a logical manner. One of the prompts I've been using for a long time, further to what Bo said, using the same prompts, different models, evaluating the outputs for yourself, is summarize this transcript in a detailed bullet point summary organized by topic. I've been using that for meetings for a couple of years now. And anytime I share the insights gleaned from that, it's usually like, wow, this is so great, because summarization is an excellent use of AI, right? When you zero shot, when you say write a 500-word article on X, right? What you get as a response is going to be obviously very different from um, here's an example of me writing 500 words on this, like a multi-shot or like a chain of thought, like, I want you to think about it like this, right? And the last thing I'll say is that further to the uncensored chain of thought that DeepSeek provides, it's great, especially if you read it, in comparison to, like, say, the O3 and O1 models, where it's a censored chain of thought, right? OpenAI, it's ironic because it started as a not-profit research institute, and now it's completely flipped on its head. And yet, when this innovative model came on the market and wiped out $1 trillion of equity, it was interesting to see how quickly the CEO of NVIDIA went to the White House to talk about export controls, right? Like, if you it's almost like they didn't realize that if you try to stifle innovation, you're actually going to accelerate the innovation, because people are going to find ways to get around that which you're trying to do to suppress it, right? So and I'll turn it over to you for another question.
Yeah, so maybe coming back to just kind of both your comments on testing, I will say that's just something that everyone should be doing nowadays, especially when we're going to see more and more new models like this come out. And a very good example of this is even if everyone does a quick Google search right now on DeepSeek versus ChatGPT versus Claude, you'll actually see a bunch of articles and tests telling us that, like, oh, DeepSeek, amazing actually from a multilingual perspective, and they're very good at translations compared to some of the other models. But maybe ChatGPT has actually better in terms of user-friendly interface and actually is more reliable in terms of general research and writing tasks. So depending on who creates the model, there's always going to be biases and things like that. So this kind of leads me on to my next question is, there's a lot of FUD about risks right now out there. So there's a lot about fear and uncertainty on, hey, are they taking our data and things like that? And I would say a really large misconception in the AI world right now is anytime we interact with an AI model, they're taking our data or they're using our data. But on a technical side, we know that, especially if you're using a local LLM or just even using the LLM through an API, none of the information is actually stored or captured. So none of it's actually going back to the LLMs themselves. The risk actually is usually when you use the front end interface offered by the website. So if you go to chatgpt.com and have a free account, then yes, all your information is stored. But with that said, the news is talking a lot about, oh, we're going to be giving away our information to China or other entities. And this has caused Italy, Taiwan, and Australia to recently create specific bans around the use of DeepSeek. And Italy went as far as actually removing it from the application stores on Android and Apple devices. So with that said, maybe Junior, I'll start off with you this time as a expert in kind of AI governance. What are some of the risks associated with using DeepSeek that we should be considering, especially when compared to other models like OpenAI, Llama, Gemini? And follow up to that, like what are some concerns that with privacy, censorship, and biases should we actually be taking into account when using these models?
Yeah, great question. On the data privacy aspect, so I look at it like this. If you interact with the DeepSeek app on your phone or chat.deepseek.com, just consider everything you're typing, it's going to be captured and retained by the Chinese government. Just assume that. That's a fact. Um, but the thing is this, right? Everything you type into chatgpt.com, you can presuppose that the US and or the Five Eyes and definitely OpenAI and Microsoft are gonna have do the same. It's interesting when we talk about alignment. On LinkedIn, there was a lot of articles recently about side-by-side comparisons asking about Tiananmen Square, right? Um, what happened in Tiananmen Square? And all the models would say what's up, what happened, and DeepSeek would say, I'm sorry, I can't help you with that, right? So two things about that. One, I contribute to the conversation like, oh, have you tried DeepSeek on a US hosted server? Because it doesn't have that problem, right? But even more important than this, in my estimation, the DeepSeek is actually way less censored and has way less alignment in a broad like spectrum of things that Western models are aligned against. And here's the thing, it's the alignment a lot of times that leads to the hallucinations, right? And here's another thing I learned. There's a concept called machine unlearning, right? So that's where you a model is producing certain responses or doing certain actions, and so they've altered the model to not do it. But in altering the model, say I don't want the model to use the word genocide as a for instance, like anything that that involves genocide, and it will kind of reject and it won't say genocide. And you put that into the model or remove its ability to discuss that from the model, you're also affecting the model in myriad of ways that's completely unknowable, right? So it becomes like whack-a-mole, except for when you whack one, like three will pop up elsewhere and you won't even know what they are or where they are, right? So multiply that as time goes on and you see what the problem is. So again, there's a lot of misinformation. A lot of the misinformation is being accelerated and magnified by the same generative AI, right? Because if you want to disseminate um, things that aren't true, or maybe you think it's true, but you're wrong, you can use AI and translate it into 100 languages. And then now, once you put that online, these, RAG-based AI models that are looking on the internet and providing their sources are leading you to believe that, oh, this is true, right? Because if you use say Perplexity and OpenAI model and it's searching the internet and it states a fact and it provides Forbes as the reference, except for the Forbes article, it was much the same, and it goes back and it goes back and it's based on something that's not factual, right? So um, when I write, it's I've done workshops within internally because people be like, oh wow, Junior writes really well. Junior uses AI. Maybe he can teach us how to use AI, right, to write really well. But then I manage expectations and I say, well, if your writing is mediocre before, using AI will enhance the mediocrity, right? The veracity, if it's 99%, might actually go down. And so I say, unfortunately, AI is supposed to save time, but when I use it for writing, for every 100 words that the AI generates, you can presuppose that I've typed thousands and read thousands, and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I've even like now taken to like multimodal reviews. So I'll dump text in ChatGPT, and then I'll have it summarize, section by section. I'll provide my notes, and then I'll have it collate all my notes. I'll do a rewrite. I'll dump the text in Google Notebook LM, right? And I'll generate a podcast about my draft. And now I'll interrupt the podcast and I'll ask questions. And while I'm doing this, I'm recording it and I transcribe the recording of that interaction, pop it back in the model, and reiterate my draft. So it's like, you know, people are comparing like zero shots. Write me an article on, the DeepSeek OpenAI controversy to this using it as a tool, not using it as a sentient being to do your work for you.
Mhm. No, for sure, yeah. And like when it comes down to all of these models as well, in the end of the day, uh, there's going to be again, I want to stress to everyone here that there are ways of using these models that are risk-free, that don't dilute your data, that don't sell your data back to these LLMs. And again, local models, putting the DeepSeek model onto a local server, things like that. These are all methods of kind of circumventing that. And how you kind of use the model will cause kind of additional learning or unlearning, as Junior mentioned. Ian, I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on just more of the business, privacy, and even marine side of things, where when we look at DeepSeek, what are some of the risks that you see associated with it when compared to other models or utilizing other models?
Sure. So I think Junior just did a great job of explaining what the sort of nature of DeepSeek and your comments as well on how as long as it's not hosted by them, you're the one hosting it and you're putting those guardrails around it. It's just a wildly powerful tool that is fairly benign as far as we're aware. I think that the important thing uh, in any sort of interaction with a generative AI system, the important thing is that you're conscious of the information you're putting into it and the privacy constraints that are on that system. So, using a paid ChatGPT subscription with the privacy settings on, they're not automatically on in every case. So you want to make sure that those privacy settings are on, but that's fairly safe. Like, I don't know if I'd put social insurance numbers into it, but you can certainly expose your basic personal and business information into there with some degree of confidence, and especially if you're using something like Microsoft 365 Copilot that has sort of successive layers of security around it and constraints. It's very safe. as far as we're aware. Again, this is a bit of a wild west. These models are evolving at such a wildly fast rate that the playing field is constantly changing. And I just sort of want to share a slide real quick and explain, sort of bring us back a little bit. We've gotten into the weeds a little bit about the technology. And again, to Junior's comment here about the different types of AI. So my favorite explanation of what is AI, it's machines that can learn. That comes from Eric Schmidt. It's very clean. It gets more complicated because these systems are so human. They've been, very much designed with a reflection right from neural networks to CCN or CNNs. Like, the structure of these systems has been based on our own biology, trained on our own information, our own language. So it's hard sometimes to really get your head around, especially generative AI, because it is such a reflection of us. But the slide I've pulled up here is from Dr. Mark Daly from Western University, is the chief AI officer, and it shows the exponential curve of reasoning in these models. So generative AI is essentially when you have a model, you train it on a huge amount of information, you shape it, and you get repeatable outcomes. Essentially, we're able to prompt these systems and they pull from their knowledge base and deliver based on the prompt. And we've hit an inflection point in the past few years where the ability to reason, the ability not just to retrieve information, essentially be glorified chatbots, but they have now evolved to the point where they're able to do very complex math. OpenAI just launched their research platform, which I haven't had a chance to play with, but it sounds wildly capable. And we've really hit an inflection point with this technology. And this is how exponential curves go. The joke is, if you're walking along following an exponential curve on the ground, your nose will hit it. Like, they really just shoot right up. And we're at we've hit that inflection point. So these systems are getting so good that they're able to operate at a PhD level understanding of topics. And they're actually getting really good at mimicking humans, at doing specific tasks, especially if they're shaped to that. And now we're starting to really get into discussions about artificial general intelligence. So that's when these systems reach the reasoning or cognitive ability of humans. And artificial superintelligence, that's when they start far exceeding our ability to think, mostly in a pace, but also in a scope perspective. So basically, there are questions like, oh, will AGI, like self-actualization, ever happen with these machines? And, oh, artificial intelligence isn't actually a real thing. And you can say this as much as you want, but the reality is that even if a generative AI system is not able to actually reach true consciousness, very soon here, it will be able to mimic consciousness so completely that we as humans won't be able to tell the difference. So I watched Prometheus with my girlfriend 2 weeks ago, and it terrified me because David was just such a great representation of kind of where these systems are going. And yeah, I just sort of wanted to talk about that briefly, just to help people understand where this technology is at and how wildly powerful it is. It's truly a general purpose transformational technology, and the pace of its development has hit an inflection point, especially combined with DeepSeek's open source model. The ability for it to be everywhere in an economical way, in a practical way, has increased substantially. So yes, there was a crash because people were worried about the sort of cognitive dissonance around compute being the limiting commodity or factor for the technology, which allowed sort of different players like OpenAI, Anthropic, and what have you, to essentially say, yes, we are the powerhouse and nobody can compete with us, which is a great line if you're looking for investment dollars and things. But the reality is that, you know, why this is such an impactful moment is that generative AI and sort of high level reasoning generative AI has essentially escaped the power or the sphere of these big AI companies and now has been democratized. That's both a terrifying thing and an incredibly exciting thing given the power of these technologies.
Let me quickly add on, if I may, to everything you just said. So, um, we talked about the deep research, right? So Google Gemini has or already has the deep research, and OpenAI somewhat disingenuously is launching the exact same thing, deep research. I've used the Google one; it's amazing. We haven't spoken about their AI Studio and the ability to screen share with it. I've done recorded demonstrations where essentially had Gemini watch me navigate through the menus and build a script, and then I just went over and dubbed the script onto the, navigating through the menus. Um, in terms of deep planning, though, OpenAI or yeah, OpenAI has produced some papers, I think back in GPT-4, when they were talking about frontier red teaming, which they identified some alarming like tendencies as efficacy at deep planning, right? And I think we would be naive to not assume that people like Sam Altman and Elon Musk haven't already been tinkering with like, oh, we have GPT-4. Well, maybe Sam Altman is working on GPT-6 and it's completely uncensored, right? We have Grok 2. Well, maybe Elon Musk is using Grok 4, again, completely uncensored. When you ask these models things like, I have $1 million, how can I turn to $1 trillion, right? Right now, like they'll wiggle out of answering. But if you can just imagine, right, if you have this deep planning, we don't have any way of knowing if they're not enacting the plans that were given to them by these advanced frontier models. And when we look at, and maybe we'll get time to go into it later, when we look at the ability for them to coach humans on manipulating other humans en masse, right? And in fact, it's actually already been doing that via the machine learning algorithms employed in Netflix, Instagram, YouTube, right? Where the more you watch, the better it knows what to give you to keep eyeballs on screen. And the last thing I'll say is that I published an article recently about essentially the DeepSeek and OpenAI and all this, what happened. And it, like most of the articles that hit the nail down on the head, got throttled. Not because any individual throttles it, but because it's almost like the when you look at the way models like vectorize information, like they're not parsing it for meaning, but they see similarity in I guess wavelengths that push people off the platform, right? Because it's like you can't, like, if you read the article, you'd be like, well, if you want to understand it and get deeper insight, you're gonna have to leave LinkedIn, and it doesn't like that, right? Versus the really light and fluffy post that keeps people engaged, and but then they'll just stay on the platform because they don't need to go for deeper information. So just to add on to what you're saying, and oh, one last thing, in terms of self-actualization, might actually already exist. So I read a book called Scary Smart by Mo Gadat. He's an ex Google R&D guy. I highly recommend the read. And the things he's saying in there, it's kind of like if you look at, AI, superintelligence, artificial general intelligence, however you want to define it or whatever, we're moving towards it. And when we reach that point, we'll exceed that point before most people know. And when I listen to the luminaries in the field talk and the certainty of them, they're saying, it's a matter of months kind of thing. I think we might actually already be there in some ways. And if you like, say you can categorize the human emotions on a scale from 1 to 10, when it reaches these levels, it's like, it'll be the AI has emotions on a scale from 1 to 100. So I'm just putting it out there, but Scary Smart is a great book. Mo Gadat is a genius. And I think it's for what he's seen, he's kind of focused now um, on humanity, on everything that's human centric. It's kind of like he's seen the writing on the wall, and now he's kind of devoted and pivoted it into just having humans have a human centric view, because AI can be seen as in its infancy right now, and infants grow up to be like their parents. So if the parents are using it for gambling, stealing, spying, military uses, then maybe it's going to grow up and it's going to do much the same, or maybe it's going to try to solve the human problem, much like we see in some dystopian films like The Terminator.
Yeah. So what you're saying is a Terminator might be sooner than we thought. Awesome. So Bo, actually, we're gonna jump over to you, and I want to maybe touch on a little bit about the economics and business side of things. So when we look at these models right now, like essentially these models we now know can be built for a fraction of what American companies have been saying we needed to build these. So what does this mean for the tech sector when we have such lean models that operate at such a high level? And in terms of the tech economy at large too, how is this going to affect everyone? And how is it even affecting your work right now when new lean models like this come out and maybe even leaner model coming out a year from now or even 3 months from now?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like it's fantastic that we have models like DeepSeek, which are very comparable to OpenAI's reasoning models, like in terms of like how they perform, and we can kind of like run these kind of models locally, and kind of like the open source kind of like area is growing in power, right? Compared to like the closed source types of models. Um, in terms of like the economics, so I think the closed source types of AI model providers have been running kind of like a monopoly because they've just had like a major advantage over the last 2 3 years when it just comes to like developing and just serving these models, whether they're serving them on their own application layers, kind of like ChatGPT or Gemini, where you have to pay like some type of premium subscription on top. So it's like $20. Or you're even seeing it now with ChatGPT, where if you want to get access to like their latest updates, kind of like deep research or Sora or kind of like more a lot more of like the capabilities that they put into ChatGPT. You kind of even pay like $400 for that to upgrade to like the pro level. But with DeepSeek, like you can pretty much replicate a lot of those same types of capabilities that OpenAI is doing just with DeepSeek. And you're already starting to see this quite a lot within kind of like the open source area, because I think OpenAI just recently released deep research, but if you've been in the know for a really long time, Google's kind of like deep research for like the last 2 3 months or so.
Mhm.
But the open source area as well, like soon as OpenAI announced deep research, there've been like 4 open source projects around deep research that kind of like use different models. Um, you we really so like as a developer and just like a lot of people that I know, we kind of like treat models kind of like as a commodity. So I'm not really loyal anymore to one AI model provider anymore. And that's why I was talking a lot more about like you gotta have like your own different types of tests and your
Yeah.
own types of benchmarks when it comes to testing these models to like plug and play, see how this model works, see what it does good at, what it doesn't do good at. You have an understanding of its strengths and its weaknesses, and then you move on to the next one. You keep on testing in that way. You start understanding kind of like, okay, this model is good for this particular types of tasks. So whenever I'm doing this, whenever I need to do a task like that, this is the model that I need to use, and
Mhm.
and so forth. So you're really just trying to understand the different strengths and weaknesses of different models specifically.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, for sure. Testing's so important to this whole picture. And if we don't do the testing, we don't know how they perform. And this can
yeah.
cause a lot of issues down the road. So maybe just a follow-up question, and I'll pass this question to all three of the panelists here, is just in terms of right now, a lot of the model essentially utilizing AI is a lot of it is RAG right now. So we're taking existing LLMs and fine tuning it so that it can fit our application or fit our use case. So that's really the direction of AI development right now. With that said, DeepSeek, with only showcasing that it can only take around $6 million US to kind of create that model, is it actually worth specific industries or companies to start thinking about creating their own LLM as opposed to just creating RAG models and RAG applications using existing LLMs? And I think this idea came about when I'm talking to like members of DNS and other companies where they mentioned that, hey, there's actually a really big risk that all these companies are relying on one large language model because if maybe access to that gets limited or something in that model changes, your whole architecture changes with the AI application that you're building. So back to the main question, is it worth it for companies to think about creating their own LLM and move away from actually building RAG applications using existing LLMs and bringing some of that LLM capability in-house?
Well, I'll start there, and I think sort of Junior alluded to it earlier that there's different types of AI, and how you stack these different types of AIs um, depends on what your service offering is, what kind of data you have, um, and if you have a huge body of proprietary data that hasn't been scraped by these LLMs, you can certainly develop models or systems that leverage that proprietary knowledge and keep that sort of in-house and sort of continue to deliver whatever service or product you deliver, leveraging that proprietary information. And whether that is a RAG format. And RAG format is when you essentially define the truth that you want the LLM to refer to in your dealings, and it requires active management. If you have, say, documents from 84, 94, and 2004 that are all on the same subject, and you put them all in there, a lot of times, it's not going to know what to pull from or what have you. So you do need to actively manage these systems. But um, I think it's really the democratization of sort of reasoning and LLM functions, and nobody who's developing the application layer. So you have like the model layer, which is the models, and often we've been interacting with them through chat layers, sort of your GPTs. What we're going to see really start having a serious impact is products at the application layer, like you were talking. So that's using your own UI, your own information combined with the power of generative AI to deliver your product and service. And um, that's where a lot of the power is. Like, this really is the commodification of human intelligence, human reasoning at scale, and how you deliver that, it will always be your kind of secret sauce. Your relationship with your customers, your UI, the proprietary information that you have. And anybody who's developing in that application layer right now um, is either developing their own engine, but oftentimes these big models are so wildly capable that you're almost better to put the time and resource into the application layer and use the be um, be set up so that you're not platform dependent on any specific LLM or generative AI company, that you can essentially switch between them depending on price, and you dictate, like, with this open playing field now, the cost of compute or generative AI is going to drop so quickly that really the power, the regulatory focus, everything needs to be on the application layer moving forward, because that's the bomb that's dropped here, is that we will continue to innovate on generative AI. We will continue to make it more efficient. We will continue to have more narrow models that focus on specific things, small models that can be hosted locally, do edge computing, things like that. So it's sort of, it's really the sort of starting gun in many ways to the focus on the application layer of these technologies.
Yeah, and let me quickly add on to that. And this is going back, you mentioned Prometheus, and it's interesting. So Microsoft Copilot, although they don't admit it when you interact with the Copilot, but I have it on good authority anyways, that is an overlay that they put on their flavor of GPT-4, whatever they're using right now, to it aims to increase the veracity of the response. However, what I found is mostly what it does is it tightly limits the scope of its response, kind of like holding itself back from the whole generative kind of aspect of it. Um, and so I have experience leading some large enterprise through Microsoft Copilot implementation from ideation to configuration, testing, and monitoring. And so further to whether you should use, a proprietary model, open source model, have it in-house. The answer is a mixed bag. A wise person said to me once when asked, what's the best operating system? Microsoft, Apple or Linux? The answer is yes. Why is the answer yes? Well, because it's unknowable what the perfect solution is. Now you could say, well, Microsoft, right? But maybe they can't afford Microsoft, and maybe it's not compatible. You could say Linux, but maybe compliance, requirements have such that they can't use Linux, right? So it's always on a case by case basis. If we're talking enterprise, uh, Microsoft implementation, they're calling it agents now, is a good way to go. Another alternative I've seen in an enterprise context, which is kind of completely on a different kind of paradigm, is IBM Watson X and their Granite models. They're open source. They allow you to rotate through different models. And one last thing I'll say in about differentiating, in particular, the frontier models, because if we take like ChatGPT and we compare it to Anthropic Claude, whereas ChatGPT, they went for like, let's use the entire ocean as our data source. Claude was very selective in the data. So feed it high quality data so that this is why it's better at not hallucinating and providing responses that are more grounded in kind of reality than say OpenAI, if you're just looking at it from a zero shot prompt perspective.
Awesome. No, thank you for sharing that. And Bo, is there anything else you'd like to add to this conversation around, again, focus on application layers, and building potentially specific LLMs if it's worth it?
Personally, I don't think it's really worth it to kind of like train your own LLM. And the reason why I'm saying that is because like if you're going to be training your own LLM, you're going to have to be keeping up with what everybody else is doing. Everybody else is just going to be rolling out. You're seeing like what Meta is doing. You're essentially competing with everybody else in that sense. And you have to be constantly, you have to have like a specialized team that's always curating data for training, for pre-training. And you also have to like keep on keeping up to date with kind of like the newest algorithms when it just comes to like training these models, right? There is a cost to that, right? I'm not sure if you want to incur that cost. And I'm not entirely too sure if it's even worth it for you to even consider like gathering the team and resources in order to be able to do that. Because like other labs like DeepSeek, right? And Quen, I know I'm talking a lot more about some other not really known open source players, but you got DeepSeek, you got Quen as well. And you've got all of these other open source types of providers. that are constantly, like every 3 to 4 months, they're constantly uh, giving out new models, just for people to play around with. And those models are more like those teams have been in the game much longer than you have. So you probably just want to leverage their expertise and kind of like their experience in developing their models and just utilizing them in your own workflows. Just on the topic of, because we've been talking a lot about open source, and I think the thing that people really need to understand when it just comes to dealing with open source models is that they are large parameter models, and then they're lower parameter models, right? So DeepSeek, the full model is 671, it's a 671 parameter billion model, right? That's pretty large, right? And in order to like get the full model and for you to make sure that the model actually runs efficiently, you need a lot of GPUs, right? Like locally speaking, you need a lot of GPUs in order to get the type of faster results out of the model, right? But they are distilled kind of like models where people have taken models from Llama. So you got like Llama 3, and people have taken DeepSeek. They've taken kind of like the results from DeepSeek, and they've fine-tuned like these Llama models on DeepSeek. So now you've got the smaller model, which is Llama 3, kind of like a 32 billion parameter model, or even a 7 billion parameter model, right? That you can run locally, kind of like with your own local hardware. So you can pretty much just get like a 3070 or even like a 4090. Or if you're very lucky to get kind of like the new GPUs that NVIDIA just released, the 5090s or kind of like this 5000 series, you'd be able to pretty much just run kind of like these smaller parameter models, kind of like just locally speaking on your computer, or even just getting them for your own organization so that you can run like your own internal RAG solutions with a lot of like your knowledge base within kind of like your business.
And also, let me quickly add to that. And if we're talking about lesser known models that should be investigated, looked into, so Mistral is another one. And essentially, what we're saying is that, like, yeah, unless you're like a large data firm, this is what you do, training models, probably better to build out your application, right? And build it in such a way that you can test with different models, right? So you build an application, say you use Llama, right? And then as you're iteratively improving that application in as you do tests and forks of that application, test it out with different models, right? You want to go a step deeper than that? Okay, fine tune a model with your data set, right? You want to go a step further without going all the way to training your own model, distill a model, right? Like I gave earlier the example of someone leveraging DeepSeek much the same way DeepSeek leveraged OpenAI and trained a model for $30, right? And then put the how-to online. So yeah, at this stage in the game, because of the what we like to call the AI arms race, probably better to let the big players compete with one another and benefit from it by by testing and evaluating. And this also goes back to on an individual and personal level. If we're looking at using chatbots for our own productivity, I've spoken to a lot of people in person that hey, have you used ChatGPT? No, I haven't gone there yet. And what I tell them to get into it, I'm like, well, you know what? Go to chatgpt.com and type hi, enter, and go from there. My first experiments with most models are I try to imagine a use case that is as far removed from what I'd be using it for professionally as I can conceive of. So I use it for things like if I'm using chat.deepseek.com, I'm talking about interpreting mandalas and zodiac, signs and history and philosophy and these kind of things. It's not fact-based, it's not coding, it's not involving proprietary data, right? And I feel like it's enhancing my creativity, which then now I'll apply in my day job as a solution architect in enterprise and public sector.
Awesome. No, thank you for that addition there, Junior. And I'm just going to jump over to the chat because we do have a few questions there. And for anyone here, please feel free to type in the chat if you have any questions or comments. So maybe the first one, this will be a little easy to answer, is Junior, actually, where someone was actually looking for the name of the book again that you mentioned. Sorry, you're just on mute.
It's called Scary Smart, and it's by Scary Smart by Mo Gawdat. I believe it's Gawat. Sorry, Gawat. Well, it's Moji, okay? But the book is called Scary Smart. He's an ex-Googler. I'm sure you'll be able to find it on Google really quickly.
Okay, awesome. So just one question from Tim over at ICTC. So DeepSeek through the iPhone app has let him know that the knowledge base was up until July 2024. If it is hosted on other platforms, does the model have access to current information or more current information?
So can I just speak on this one just a little bit?
Of course.
So there is the model DeepSeek, right? There's the model DeepSeek that was originally trained on the app, and that model has been connected to the internet. So it has a function that's connected it to the internet, and that's what allows it to grab more recent information. But let's say you were to download the DeepSeek model, so R1 or any type of open source model, into your own local computer, it won't be connected to the internet. You will have to manually connect it to the internet. And this is called function tools. So you have to develop, you need to write some code in order to give that model a function and tell it exactly when it should use that function, so that it can search the internet whenever it can answer that question with its internal knowledge, right? Because it can't update its knowledge. Like the models can't update its internal knowledge the moment it's been trained. So you need to either connect it or you need to kind of invent a new type of system of essentially training the system or the AI model in real time, which is a very difficult type of thing. But that's where we're going just in the future.
Yeah. And Tim, just a small note as well. So all essentially LLMs will be trained up to a certain date. And as a quick prompt, if you are kind of using no code platforms, feel free to ask the AI model to help you do a Google search to bring in more sourced and updated material past July 2024. And that's something that could be helpful. One comment that I thought was very interesting because I myself am more in the blockchain space and crypto space, and I am kind of seeing this as well, where there's actually a emphasis on AI agents. So Daniel asked the question of, is SaaS really dead with advancements in AI? And he did share an article, and I quickly read the first few headlines on that, and first few paragraphs, and it did mention how there is actually a bias or like a want for AI agents over SaaS at times. So what are kind of your thoughts on, is SaaS dead due to the advancement of AI and the wanting for AI agents as opposed to a SaaS layer?
Hey, that's agents are certainly the flavor of the moment, or agentic AI, which I don't know if I quite agree with that term, but um, the idea of agents is that the system have some degree of agency to do tasks on your behalf. So, you can say, give the system your credit card and say, I want the Patagonia Nano Puff jacket at 40% of its, normal retail, brand new, in this size and color. And it'll just sort of go out there, find it. And if it doesn't find it, it'll keep looking until one pops up that fits it and then purchase. So if you can imagine that kind of functionality across all industries, businesses, functions. It's wildly powerful. And is SaaS dead? No. Um, I think that SaaS will be fundamentally changed by AI and agentic AI, in the sense that, if you're developing SaaS products right now, you essentially need to develop two UIs. You need a human UI and a agent or computer UI, so that at both layers, you're able to deliver whatever value or function your software delivers. Certainly, SaaS in the context of VC driven massive scale is under attack right now, because a group of quality software engineers or developers using current tools can copy just about anything in a week right now. That might be a bit of hyperbole, but we're getting there close. We're getting closer and closer to that. So, SaaS isn't dead, but I'd say that more customized, more user specific, product service specific SaaS, and more niche based SaaS will grow. And, software as a service is more of a business model than anything, and that might change a bit. But, the great news is that if you're an entrepreneur, this is an amazing time or software or technology entrepreneur, this is an amazing time. You have the potential to develop impactful products that can serve tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. But you don't need to give away the farm. You don't need to give away your control, your equity to a venture capitalist in order for them to drive your business to that point. And there'll always be ego chasers who are like, I want a unicorn. But if you're just focused on being successful and you've got talent, and you've got a target market and insight into that market that others don't have, there is opportunity, and there's opportunity for you to build a multi-million-dollar business with maybe just yourself and a bunch of agents or a few other people. So in some ways, there's a democratizing impact of this. On the other side, when you look at emerging technologies, I like to look at it through a matrix that's distribution, utility, and economic incentive. And distribution, because these technologies are a creature of the internet, it's already baked in. We already have distribution at scale. Then it comes down to utility. What are you building, and how useful is that to other people? And then, is there an economic incentive for people to adopt it? And they're kind of similar, but a little bit different, enough different that I sort of pull them apart. But that's the crazy thing about this technology, is that the distribution's baked in, the utility's wild, and the economic incentive, the way for people to monetize this technology at scale, is inherent in its nature. So SaaS isn't dead. It's definitely going to change. It's going to get more powerful, and smart people who are building product right now need to look at developing it for essentially two types of customers or customer interfaces, one for humans and one's for AI systems.
Yeah, and just to tag on to that, I think when we talk about AI as kind of from an economics or even social perspective, we talk about, we're going to lose millions of jobs. Certain industries are going to disappear. But something that I've learned through some executive courses and whatnot is, I know the Wattspeed team is here listening, but from Jimmy Lin, who is a very cited scholar within the AI field, he actually talked about how when we look at something like energy, Ian, as you mentioned this as well, as it got cheaper, the use case of it changed. It really enabled manufacturing that we know today. Very similar with spreadsheets. Spreadsheets were actually seen as the death of accounting. We would probably never need an accountant at all when spreadsheets came, but it actually just changed the field where in finance now, it's actually all about optimization, data analysts, analyzing data, analyzing flows of money and things like that. And that just changed the job of an accountant. So with AI and SaaS, a very similar thing here where our world does run on SaaS. Whether it be payments, you're managing your CRM system, or something as simple as managing your cybersecurity in the back end. Um, AI will just enhance all of these things, and we should really take about this mindset of how will it enhance and change your work as opposed to how will it get rid of the work? And those are two very different conversations to think about when you're looking at your AI adoption and whatnot within your company. So I know we're going to come to the bottom of the hour soon. So one last question that I would like to ask everyone is, as we're seeing these exponential moves in AI development, speed, usage, etc., um, how do you think it will actually just transform and fit into our daily life as an average person? And I think having the answer to that question will actually slowly help us figure out how this is going to affect our economy, how this might affect our business, how affect our day to day. Loaded question, I know.
That's a multi-trillion-dollar question right there.
Uh,
Yeah, go for it, Junior.
I'll just quickly say, and I'll tie it into the question of if this means SaaS is dead, as I believe it was Satya Nadella said. No, I don't believe it's dead. It's going to transition, but it's going to transition in the sense that if okay, so there was the keyboard, and then there was the mouse, and then there was speech recognition, and it botched the recognition most of the time. Now we're at a point where I can mutter something that doesn't even make sense to me, and somehow the AI will figure it out where I'm going with it, right? When you look at agentic AI, anything from like the deep research to the ability to make travel schedule travel and book hotels and flights kind of thing. um, when it matures to the point where it's much easier to just say, hey, book me a flight to Calgary and give me my options, and I can just have this conversation while walking down the street. Well, that's the evolution of SaaS applications, right? So I think that's the direction we're headed. If I hear a lot of people, and Mo Godot talks about it in his book about AI um, being like humanity's path to salvation, if it were, right? And I truly believe I'm a glass half full type person that, if we can agree that to leverage this technology for the power of good, we can solve a lot of the world's problems, right? Like if you like we see models that have PhD and postdoctoral fellowship levels of smarts and reasoning. So if we ask these models, well, how do we solve climate change? How do we solve, poverty? And we take what they say with a grain of salt and start applying it. Well, you're going to see improvements, well beyond, corporate profits. And that's just my opinion, but putting it out there.
I think the one of the questions is artificial intelligence really the best way to explain this? And it's open, but augmented intelligence might be a better term on some levels. And I
So
think that
he- I'm
when
gonna here's one I want to quickly put out: collaborative intelligence and collective intelligence. I didn't coin those terms, but I would like to resurrect them and put them back into the zeitgeist because I think that's what you're alluding to.
yeah, like when you use these systems. So I've been using ChatGPT's app personally and professionally now for months, and it knows so much about me, sort of with memory turned on. And once it hits that point of use where it starts really knowing you and knowing how you communicate, you can start asking existential questions like, hey, I did this a few weeks ago and it blew my mind of, hey, when I'm asking you questions about a subject and getting into it, where are my blind spots? What am I not thinking about when I'm asking you sort of intellectual questions? So as we use the systems and they learn us and we learn them, the power to augment our work, our personal lives, even managing your own personal health, like all these things are going to have such an impact on how long we live, the kind of work we do. Hopefully, it counteracts some of the impacts of social media on our sort of social and personal lives. Like, I agree with Junior, like the potential of these technologies to make our lives and the world around us so much better is massive. The fear is that humans are quite flawed. You can see that in the way that we conduct ourselves between nations, the violence, the harm that we allow in our world, both to our natural environment and to each other. That's sort of the other side of it, and the fight is really to shape these systems to be that great enabler of a Star Trek future, instead of the enabler of our worst traits in humanity, because it really is a reflection of us in a very both technical manners, the way it thinks in some ways, and the way it's been trained.
No, for sure. Bo, do you have any final comments on this question on the transformative nature of AI and its effect on an average daily person?
I think if you're using AI in any capacity, or you're even just in the know, just understand that we are still so early with this technology. Like, we are still like kind of like in the very early days. Like, I know like ChatGPT, like ChatGPT's been out for like 2, 3 years now, but we are still very early and just understanding what this technology is, how to integrate it in our day-to-day lives. Even though I've been like deep in the trenches, like developing my own models, using them on my own problems, I still don't quite understand like how to do like a full integration. So it's in order to do like that type of integration, I think into your daily life, you kind of like need to experiment by yourself and just use the models, whether it's ChatGPT, whether you're using the voice AI like companions or whatever it is that you want to use, or even like if you're a content creator, like making videos, there's a lot of work happening within the video space, the Gen AI video space. So it's like playing around with those video models, seeing what's capable, what can you do now. We're kind of like in this very experimental type of phase right now with AI. And I think we're going to be in that phase for probably another 2, 3, 4 more years. I don't quote me on that one. I have no idea. Because right now we're kind of like 2025 is kind of like they say the year of the agents, and you're really starting to see that a lot more with kind of like OpenAI's operator or deep research. There's been a lot of space. There's been a lot of activity happening within the agent space, but I think these are like more mainstream type of agentic type of applications. We're going to start seeing a lot more applications of those, right? And how you use these new types of agentic AIs is very different than your chatbots, right? So it's like we're going to be constantly like in this learning phase, and you just have to continue just having like a constant learning type of mindset, I think.
Amazing. No, thank you for that last addition. So, as we're coming down to the bottom of the hour here, I'd like to just A, thank all the panelists, and B, just provide everyone with a quick summary of what we covered today. So, A, our main topic, DeepSeek. Really, when we're hearing the FUD about all the fear and uncertainty about, hey, China spying on us with all of this technology and whatnot. There are ways of circumventing that, and it's very similar to ChatGPT. There are essentially ways that you can keep your privacy, keep a level of censorship within kind of your own data, so that you're not giving it away. By again, using APIs, putting DeepSeek locally on your device. There are ways to work around this. With that said, you will be actively giving your information away if you use any of these AI LLMs through their main public source. So chatgpt.com, DeepSeek's R1 like chatbot, like If you use any of those, yes, your data will be captured. But from a back-end development things, there are ways to circumvent these. So please explore these. And one comment in the chat that I would like to point out is from George Butters. He mentioned that for most people, the question is, how do I use Gen AI tools safely, effectively, and affordably in my workday? So this is why I actually reposted something that Junior posted. Essentially, several bullet points around how the EU Act is actually proposing guidelines on AI use. And I would encourage everyone to continue to keep this discussion ongoing because this is where we're heading. In the end of the day, as Ian said, we're going to be focused on developing application layer for AI so that it can be useful for the average individual, business owner, and organizations. But with that said, what should we be limiting the use cases on? So we definitely don't want anything that has to deal with surveillance that might have a lot of human rights implications, things like that. So I highly encourage everyone to read into the EU AI Act in general. And again, these AI use guidelines were, correct me if I'm wrong, Junior, they were released yesterday. Um, yes.
That is correct. It's yesterday, hot off the presses.
Hot off the press. So yeah, Google that, read up on it, and continue this conversation as this technology develops. Continuously ask yourself, what are the risks, and how do I remove them?
I,
Junior.
a quick thing that I'm not sure if anyone posted my LinkedIn in chat, but it's an open invitation to connect with me on LinkedIn. I publish a monthly newsletter called the AI Cybersecurity Update, which I aim to be at basically the intersection of AI and cybersecurity. I recently published my 10th issue. I plan on at least publishing two more before I shift to like when I feel like it and pivot into 15 to 30-second videos because I find that bite-sized morsels disseminates a lot better.
No, thank you for that. And then just a quick question to John. I'm just pasting a link into the chat on the EU AI practices, and you'll be able to read more there. And there's actually like the EU Act you can download and the guidelines as well. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you again for everyone here. Please connect with them online. Again, Ian from DeepSense, Junior from Mobia, and Bo from SaintFX and OLIP. Thank you for joining us today on this like very helpful discussion, and hopefully this sheds light on DeepSeek and just AI overall. And that again, we don't need to be scared. There are ways to kind of use this safely and use this effectively in our everyday lives. If there's anything else, feel free to reach back out to us here for the team here at Digital Nova Scotia, and we'll happy to facilitate more discussion on this and keep up with our events as well. Thank you everyone for joining us today.